Captain Midnight.
Like a lot of people out there, I'm sure, my first thought when I heard that they were rebooting the Resident Evil film series was really? Didn't that just end a few months ago or something? Now, I never hated the Resident Evil movies, but I never found much to love in them either. They were just kinda there. Yeah, they're perfectly watchable, but they're not nearly as enjoyable as even a lesser Resident Evil game. I was wondering why they thought anyone would care about this reboot. But then it was announced that James Wan, the director of The Conjuring and Insidious, would be producing the movie, and I have to admit I got interested. And I also got to thinking, hey, this is exactly how I felt about Resident Evil 7 at first too. Like the movies, the games had become too big, too bloated, and too action-oriented, to the point where I really didn't care when Biohazard was announced. But then it came out and it blew me away, revitalizing the series by taking it back to the franchise's survival horror roots.
What is that?
I'll go and check.
And if the games could do it, why not the movies too? So here's my list of the 5 things that the Resident Evil reboot could do to finally do justice to the Resident Evil name. And please, tell me what you guys think in the comments below. And, maybe shoot me a like and subscribe if you feel like it. Number 5. Set the tone. One of the greatest things about Resident Evil, I think, is that it comes in so many different flavors. While I prefer the more grounded horror of 7 and the earlier games, I know there's a lot of people out there who can't get enough of the dense mythology and over-the-top nature of the later games, and even the CGI animated movies, and that's awesome, but I really think that they need to emphasize how different this new film will be from the old ones. So it would be smart to put away the Red Bull-induced slow-mo on motorcycle-style action of the last few, and embrace a more down-to-earth, horror-focused approach. The box office for the 6th movie fell dramatically, because people have had enough of the bigger, more bombastic Resident Evil. There just isn't a lot of new ground to cover there. But no one has made a video game-based movie that is more stripped down, gritty, and honestly not aimed at 14-year-old boys. Letting people know that this Resident Evil film will be completely different, and actually scary, will go a long way towards getting people to care again. Number 4. Hire the right people. So we got James Wan producing. Awesome. He's one of the biggest names in horror right now. But of course, a lot of it will really come down to the director. Thankfully, the last few years have been an amazing time for indie horror on film, so there's a lot of great choices to pick from. Like Mike Flanagan, the director of Netflix's low-budget horror thriller Hush, the underrated Oculus, and the way better than it has any right to be Ouija sequel. Other great choices would be It Follows director David Robert Mitchell or Babadook director Jennifer Kent. All 3 of those people have proved that they have what it takes to direct a truly great horror film. Or they could go in another direction and finally give George Romero a shot, since he basically invented the zombie genre as we know it today. Now, I can already hear people in the comments yelling, George Romero hasn't directed a decent movie in years. And to them I say, shut up dude, he's George Romero. If anybody deserves it, he does. Plus he already has a history with the franchise, from directing Resident Evil 2 commercials back in the 90s. And he almost got to helm the franchise back then too, but he was passed over. Really though, either way, whether they go with him or a fresh-faced younger director, it would be a huge shift from the tone of Paul W.S. Anderson's movies. So hire someone with a unique vision and get going. Number 3. Clean up the continuity. There's something refreshing about Resident Evil 7, because it really stripped down the franchise to its most basic and terrifying roots. You're a guy, in a house, and stuff is trying to kill you. It's simple, yes, but that simplicity taps into some very powerful and very human fears. In many ways, it isn't entirely different from Atari's Haunted House all the way back in 1982. It worked then and it works now, because it's a concept that will never stop being terrifying. And Resident Evil 7 accomplished this by cleaning up and downplaying years of burdensome continuity. And yeah, it made a lot of fans mad, but I think we can agree that it was the right move. The film series should try to mirror this. Now, maybe that's implied in the word reboot, but there's really a lot of types of reboots these days. Soft reboots, hard reboots, pre-boots, it's all confusing. But where the Biohazard game is probably still in the original Resident Evil universe, The film series needs to ditch the continuities of the previous movies entirely. Resurrections, betrayals, things can get pretty convoluted after 15 years and 6 movies. And even though the movies have their hardcore fans, I'm not sure how many people would mind just dumping all that stuff and going in a fresh direction. Or at least really de-emphasizing it in favor of new characters and situations, like Resident Evil 7 did. Plus, by doing a hard reboot, there's a chance that fans could finally see more faithful versions of their favorite characters from the games on the big screen. Number 2. Building a better monster. As much as I like Resident Evil, I have to admit, I'm a little sick of zombies. And that's not really the franchise's fault, but it seems like the last few decades have just seen an absolute glut in the genre. Walking Dead, Left 4 Dead, Land of the Dead, it's a lot. And some of it is really good, but fatigue has definitely set in for me. And the giant monsters Alice was blowing away got a little old too. They need to do something different. Thankfully, RE7 managed to do just this by introducing the creepy and tragic Baker family. Completely unnerving and well written, the Bakers were exactly what the franchise needed. And then they tossed them aside for some black licorice monsters. But you know what? Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the Bakers, because the Bakers are great. Playing through that game really tapped into the same feelings of dread I felt while watching the dinner table scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time. They would provide a great blueprint, or at least a starting point, to use when writing the script for this new film. Number 1, make it good. Yeah, I know that sounds simplistic and stupid, but that is really all I'm asking for here. As a video game fan, I'm tired of trying to convince myself that, Assassin's Creed wasn't that bad, or the second Hitman film's actually kinda cool, and hey, Prince of Persia is at least watchable, because we all know the truth. There's never been a truly great movie based on a video game. Sure, you could make the case that Warcraft is actually pretty good or whatever, but would you call it great? I wouldn't. And I'm tired of the Street Fighters, the Legend of Chun-Li's, of the Alone in the Darks, and of the Far Cry's. It's time for the movie industry to start taking these adaptations seriously and start throwing some serious talent behind them. Try less Paul W.S. Andersons and more Paul Thomas Andersons, because they've tried everything to make video game movies big. They've made them low budget, high budget, dark, lighthearted, aimed at kids, aimed at adults. But they haven't tried the one thing that would actually get people to care. Make a quality movie. One that emotionally engages its audience, not just panders to them. And until they do, don't expect gamers to show up for them anytime soon.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.